The Wyoming wind had teeth that morning, gnawing through the thin walls of the boarding house where Rebecca Martinez pressed her face against the frosted window. Ice crystals bloomed across the glass like cemetery flowers, and through them she watched Coyote Ridge wake to another merciless dawn. 18 winters had taught her that survival came in many forms, sometimes as bread, sometimes as shelter, and today, perhaps, as marriage to a man she'd never properly met. "Becca, child, step away from that window before you catch your death." "Mrs.?" Harrow's voice creaked like her floorboards. The boarding house proprietress had taken Becca in 3 months ago when consumption finally claimed her mother. But charity had its limits. "Sheriff Carver will be here within the hour. You'll want to look presentable." Presentable. Becca smoothed her mother's faded blue dress, the one good thing left from their journey north from New Mexico territory. The fabric whispered of better days, of her mother's laughter before the coughing started, before Papa died in the mines. She was good with needle and thread, had mended this dress so many times it held more of her stitches than original weave, but no amount of skill could disguise what she was, a Mexican orphan in a town that barely tolerated her presence. Through the window, she glimpsed Sheriff Wade Carver crossing Main Street, his long stride eating up the frozen ground. Even from here, she could see the weight he carried in his shoulders, the way his hand never strayed far from the Colt at his hip. The black band on his arm had faded but remained 8 months since Martha Carver died, birthing a child who followed her to the grave within hours. "He's a good man, Mrs." Harrow said, joining her at the window. "Hard, maybe, but fair. Those children need a woman's touch." "Those children," Seth, 11 going on 40, who'd taken to wearing his father's old hat and checking the locks each night. The twins, May and Eli, 9 years old and opposite as sun and storm. Little Lula, just 6, who hadn't spoken a full sentence since her mother died. Becca had seen them at church, 4 small shadows trailing their father like ducklings afraid of hawks. The arrangement was simple. Laid out in Sheriff Carver's precise handwriting, marriage in exchange for room, board, and respectability. She would mother his children, keep his house, and in return, receive the protection of his name and badge. Not love. Wade Carver had been clear about that in his letter. Love was a luxury neither could afford. "It's time, Mrs." Harrow announced as boots thundered up the porch steps. Sheriff Carver filled the doorway like weather itself, inevitable and implacable. Up close, Becca could see the premature gray threading through his dark hair, the deep lines carved by sun and sorrow around his eyes. He was 32, according to the marriage certificate she'd already signed, but looked older. His gaze swept over her once, assessing, before he removed his hat. "Miss Martinez." His voice rumbled low. "Careful. You're certain about this?" Was she certain certainty was for people with choices? She was certain only that winter was coming. That Mrs. Harrow needed her room for paying guests, and that the alternatives, working the saloon, leaving town with the railroad crews, or starving, were worse than marrying a stern widower. "I am certain. Sheriff Carver." She lifted her chin, meeting his eyes. Her English was good, carefully practiced, with only the faintest trace of her mother's accent. "Are you?" Something flickered across his face, surprise, perhaps, or respect. "My children are difficult. Seth thinks he's the man of the house now. Eli fights everything and everyone. May cries at night. And Lula," he paused, swallowing. "Lula still sets a place for her mother at dinner. Children grieve in their own ways," Becca said softly. "As do fathers." His jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "The house is simple. 2 bedrooms upstairs for the children, 1 downstairs for—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "You'll have the downstairs room. I'll take the barn loft until things settle." "Until never," his tone suggested. This was a business arrangement, nothing more. "I understand. The pay is $20 monthly for household expenses. The garden plot out back is yours to manage. We attend church Sundays. School board meets monthly. And I'm often called away on sheriff business. Can you shoot? A rifle. My father taught me. I'll teach you better. This isn't New Mexico territory. Out here, the law stretches thin. He wasn't wrong. Coyote Ridge perched on the edge of civilization like a crow on a fence post, watching the wild country beyond. The Union Pacific had promised to bring the railroad through, setting off a land rush that attracted both opportunity and opportunists. Just last month, the Hernandez family's ranch had been burned out by unknown parties, though everyone knew the Circle B ranch had been eyeing their water rights. We should go, Sheriff Carver said. Pastor Morrison is waiting. The walk to the church felt like crossing a frozen lake, each step careful. Testing. Main Street stretched before them, Olson's General Store, with its false front reaching toward respectability. The Broken Spoke Saloon already conducting its morning business. The postal office where Mr. Chen sorted mail despite the whispers about Chinese taking white jobs. Curtains twitched as they passed. Becca heard the whispers starting already. That Mexican girl. Wade's lost his mind. Those poor children. The church stood at the town's edge, its wooden steeple pointing accusingly at the gray sky. Inside, it smelled of pine sap and old prayers. Pastor Morrison waited at the altar, his wife at the organ, and 4 small figures occupied the front pew, dressed in their Sunday clothes. Seth stood as they entered, his young face set in lines that belonged on someone twice his age. He'd combed his sandy hair flat, but a stubborn cowlick defied his efforts. The twins flanked Lula May in a dress that had been let down twice, Eli in pants that were already too short. Lula clutched a rag doll, her thumb in her mouth. "Children," Wade said, his voice gentling. "This is Miss Martinez, Becca." Seth's eyes, his father's eyes, assessed her with the same calculating look. "Ma'am," he said formally, like he'd practiced. The twins mumbled greetings. Lula just stared. "I'm pleased to meet you all," Becca said, resisting the urge to kneel to their level. That would come later. Today. She needed to be strong, needed them to see her as capable rather than young. "Your father has told me much about you." "Did he tell you Eli put a snake in the schoolmarm's desk?" May piped up, earning an elbow from her twin. "Did not." "Did too?" "Enough," Wade said quietly, and they subsided. But Becca caught the glimmer of something in his eyes, fondness, exasperation, love. So he wasn't all stone after all. The ceremony was brief, functional. Becca wore her mother's dress and her mother's courage. Wade wore his badge and his grief. The children watched like jurors at a trial, when Pastor Morrison pronounced them man and wife. Wade leaned down and brushed his lips against her cheek, a gesture so quick she might have imagined it, except for the warmth that lingered. "Welcome to the family," Seth said formally as they signed the register. But his eyes said something else entirely. "You're not my mother. You'll never be my mother." Eli made his position clear by accidentally on purpose stepping on her hem as they walked back down the aisle. May slipped her small hand into Becca's for just a moment before snatching it back, and Lula. Lula fell asleep against her father's shoulder, her doll's button eyes staring accusingly at her new stepmother. Outside, the November sky spat snow like complaints. Wade's wagon waited, loaded with Becca's few possessions, her mother's trunk, her sewing basket, the Spanish Bible that had crossed 3 territories. The house stood a quarter-mile from town, close enough for safety, far enough for privacy. It squatted against the landscape like it was bracing for a blow-weathered boards. Strong bones, windows that needed washing. "It's not much," Wade said as he helped her down from the wagon. "It's sturdy," Becca replied, which was more than she could say for most things in her life. Inside, the house revealed itself in layers. The kitchen dominated the main floor, its cast-iron stove radiating heat like a black heart, a parlor that doubled as Wade's office, his desk covered in wanted posters and correspondence. The stairs led to mystery. She could hear the children's feet overhead, quick as mice. "I'll show you to your room," Wade said stiffly. The downstairs bedroom was small but clean, with a quilt that had seen better decades and a window facing the mountains. Someone she'd guess, had placed a jar of prairie roses on the dresser. "Thank you," Becca said to the empty doorway. Wade had already retreated to the barn. She unpacked slowly, hanging her 3 dresses in the wardrobe, placing her mother's photograph on the dresser. Through the window, she watched Wade split wood with mechanical precision, each swing of the axe punctuating the reality of her choice: married. To a man who couldn't meet her eyes, raising children who didn't want her, in a town that would always see her as foreign. But as the afternoon sun slanted through the window, catching on her mother's dress and Wade's wedding band hastily purchased, slightly too big on her finger, Becca made herself a promise. She would earn her place here, not through love, perhaps, but through work and patience and the kind of stubborn survival that had brought her this far. A crash from upstairs, followed by Eli's voice. "It wasn't me." "Was too," May shrieked. Becca Martinez, no. Becca Carver now squared her shoulders and headed for the stairs. She had a family to tend to, whether they wanted her or not. The news arrived with Deputy Jim Hawkins 3 days after the wedding, his horse lathered with sweat despite the November cold. Becca was elbow-deep in bread dough when he burst through the kitchen door without knocking, a habit she'd learned all lawmen shared. Wade, they hit the payroll station at Willow Creek. Hawkins's face was flushed, his breath coming in clouds. Killed the messenger, took everything. Black Mesa riders for certain found their mark burned into the station door. Wade emerged from his office, already reaching for his gun belt. "How long ago?" "Yesterday noon. Tracks head this way before splitting up near Devil's Canyon." Becca watched her new husband transform from father to lawman in seconds. His jaw set, eyes hardened, hands checking weapons with practiced efficiency. This was the man the town depended on, the one who stood between civilization and chaos. "I'll need provisions for 3 days," Wade told her, not quite meeting her eyes. They'd barely spoken since the wedding, existing in the same house like polite strangers. "The children..." "We'll be fine," Becca finished. "I'll manage." He paused at the door, looking back. "Seth knows where I keep the spare rifle, just in case." Then he was gone, leaving her with flour-dusted hands and 4 children who didn't trust her. May appeared in the doorway first, drawn by the commotion. "Papa's leaving again," the girl said, not quite a question. "He'll be back." Becca returned to her bread, kneading with perhaps more force than necessary. "Your father always comes back. That's what Mama used to say." The words hung between them like smoke. Becca's hands stilled on the dough. Through the window, she could see Wade and Hawkins mounting up, their silhouettes dark against the threatening sky. That evening, the household routines Becca had been trying to establish crumbled. Eli refused to eat the beans and cornbread she'd made, declaring them Mexican food, with a sneer that belonged on someone older's face. Seth took his plate to his father's office, positioning himself at the window with Wade's field glasses. May picked at her food, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. Only Lula ate, mechanical and quiet, her rag doll propped in Wade's empty chair. "Your father needs strength to do his job," Becca said carefully. "We honor him by maintaining the household in his absence." "You're not our mother," Eli shot back. "You don't get to tell us what honors him." "Eli," May gasped, but her twin was already storming from the table. That night, Becca learned what Wade's absence truly meant. Lula woke screaming from nightmares, calling for her mama. When Becca tried to comfort her, the child fought like a wildcat, small fists flailing. It was Seth who finally calmed her, Humming a lullaby Becca didn't recognize while shooting accusatory glances over his sister's head. The second day brought its own challenges. During the reading lesson, Becca attempted. Eli accidentally spilled ink across the primer. At lunch, she discovered salt poured liberally into the sugar bowl. May's guilty face gave away the culprit. Even Seth, usually above such pranks, made his position clear by pointedly redoing every chore she'd completed, as if her Mexican hands had somehow tainted the wash water or grain bins. But it was Lula's fever that changed everything. It started as a flush during dinner, the child pushing away her barely touched plate. By nightfall, she burned like a stove, her small body shaking with chills. Becca recognized the signs. She'd seen enough fever in the mining camps to know danger when it knocked. "Malaria," she said, feeling the child's racing pulse. "From the mosquitoes at Sabine Fork, we need willow bark and clean water. Seth, stoke the stove. May, fetch all the clean rags you can find." Eli. "Why should we listen to you?" Eli challenged, but fear flickered in his eyes as he watched Lula thrash. "Because your sister needs us." Becca didn't raise her voice, but something in her tone cut through his defiance. "All of us, now move." They moved. The night became a blur of cold compresses, willow bark tea, and whispered prayers in 2 languages. Becca drew on every remedy her mother had taught her, every trick learned from curanderas and frontier doctors alike. She showed May how to cool fevered skin without shocking the system, taught Seth the signs of crisis approaching. Even Eli, stubborn Eli, followed her directions as they fought to break the fever's hold. "Mama," Lula whimpered, unseeing eyes searching the shadows. "Want Mama?" "Shh, pequeña," Becca murmured, not caring that Spanish slipped out. "You're safe. We're all here." That's what Mama called her, May whispered. "Little one." She had a bit of Spanish from her grandmother. Dawn found them all in Lula's room, Seth dozing in the chair. The twins curled together on the floor, Becca still bathing the child's face. The fever had broken near 3 in the morning, leaving Lula weak but lucid. "Becca," the little girl croaked, focusing on her stepmother's face. "You stayed." "Of course I stayed. Where else would I be?" Lula's small hand found hers, holding tight. "Mama went away. When the fever came, she went away." Understanding hit like a fist. Martha Carver hadn't died in childbirth. She'd died of fever after, leaving her children to watch her slip away over days. No wonder they fought so hard against attachment. "I'm not going anywhere," Becca promised, including all 4 children in her gaze. "This is my family now. You're stuck with me." Eli was the first to break. "I'm sorry about the salt," he mumbled, "and the ink, and stepping on my dress." A ghost of a smile. That was an accident, mostly. They were still there, a tentative truce forming over Lula's sickbed. When hoofbeats announced Wade's return, he burst through the door like judgment itself, still trail dusty and rigid with fear someone had failed to send word about. "Papa!" Lula's weak cry sent him to his knees beside the bed. "Baby girl." His voice cracked as he gathered her close, over her head. His eyes found Becca. Something passed between them, gratitude, maybe, or recognition. "The fever broke this morning," Seth reported. "Becca knew what to do. She made us help. He swallowed. "She saved her." Wade's arms tightened around Lula. When he looked at Becca again, she saw the walls beginning to crack. "Thank you," he said simply, but the words carried weight. Later, after the children had been fed and settled together in Seth's room, unwilling to separate, Wade found Becca in the kitchen. She was making soup stock from bones, exhaustion written in every line of her body. "You should rest," he said awkwardly. "You've been up all night." "So have they." She nodded toward the stairs. Children need routine, especially after crisis. Hot food, clean clothes, The ordinary things that say life continues. Wade studied her. This 18-year-old girl who'd fought for his children like a seasoned mother. I found something at the station, he said slowly, reaching into his pocket. Something that doesn't make sense. He produced a letter, water-stained and torn. The address was barely legible, but she could make out S.K. and what might have been Coyote Ridge. Silas Kincaid, Wade said, watching her face. Leader of the Black Mesa Riders. This was in the messenger's pocket, but it wasn't mail from the robbery. It's older. You think he's connected to someone here? Maybe. Wade folded the letter carefully. His expression troubled. The tracks split up to confuse pursuit, but one set came this way, not toward Mexico or the mountains, but here, like they were scouting. A chill ran down Becca's spine that had nothing to do with the November wind rattling the windows. Scouting for what? That's what worries me. He moved to the window, scanning the darkness beyond. The riders have never hit this close before. And that letter? I need to increase patrols, post watches. The children will be protected. Becca finished. By both of us. He turned back to her, and for the first time since their wedding, truly looked at her. Not as the Mexican girl he'd married from necessity, not as hired help for his children, but as partner in guarding what mattered most. I'll teach you to shoot better tomorrow, he said. The rifle and the Colt both, and Seth's old enough to learn properly too. The twins will want to learn. A slight smile tugged at his mouth. Maybe Eli would shoot his own foot off showing off. Then we'll teach him patience first. Wade tested the word, seemed to find it acceptable. Yes, I suppose we will. From upstairs came the sound of children stirring Eli's voice, rising in complaint about something. May shushing him, Seth's lower tones restoring order. Normal sounds, precious in their ordinariness. I should check on them, Becca said, but Wade caught her arm gently. Thank you, he said again, and this time she heard everything he couldn't say yet about trust, about fear, about the slow possibility of something more than arrangement between them. Martha would have... He stopped, swallowed. You did right by them, by her memory. Becca nodded, understanding the gift in those words. They're good children. They just need time. Time. Wade released her arm, stepped back. Yes, we all need time. But as Becca climbed the stairs to check on her charges, her children now, in all but birth, she wondered how much time they had. Somewhere in the darkness. The Black Mesa Riders were planning something. The letter in Wade's pocket suggested connections that could shatter their fragile peace. For now, though, there was soup to finish and children to tend. There were ordinary miracles to work with patient hands and stubborn love. The rest, the dangers circling like wolves. The mysteries hidden in water-stained letters would have to wait. Tomorrow, she'd learn to shoot. Tonight, she'd hold the line with soup and stories and the quiet courage of keeping on. Sunday morning dawned crisp and bright. The kind of November day that made the Wyoming sky look like painted china. Becca had been up since before dawn, pressing the children's church clothes and coaxing Eli's stubborn cowlick into submission. It would be their first public appearance as a family since the wedding 2 weeks ago. Hold still, she told Eli, who squirmed under her ministrations. You want to look respectable, don't you? Don't see why, he muttered, but submitted to the hair pomade. The fever crisis with Lula had shifted something between them all. Not trust exactly, but a cessation of hostilities. Wade emerged from the barn where he'd been sleeping, freshly shaved and wearing his good black suit. He paused in the doorway, taking in the sight of his family, assembled Seth helping Lula with her coat buttons, May straightening Eli's collar, Becca tying ribbons in the girl's hair. Something soft crossed his face before the mask of sheriff settled back into place. Everyone ready. His eyes lingered on Becca in her blue dress, the same one from their wedding, but she'd added her mother's lace collar. transforming it into something almost elegant. The walk to town felt longer than usual, weighted with unspoken significance. This was Coyote Ridge's chance to inspect the new Carver family configuration, to pass judgment on Wade's choice and Becca's place among them. She kept her chin high, one hand on Lula's shoulder, the other holding May's hand shields and supports in equal measure. Main Street bustled with Sunday traffic. The Chinese laundry was shuttered, but she could see Mr. Chen's family through the upper windows, preparing their own Sabbath meal. The saloon stood silent, waiting for afternoon to bring the after-church crowd, and everywhere, eyes followed their progress. "Sheriff," Judge Holcomb nodded, his gaze sliding to Becca with barely concealed curiosity. "Mrs. Carver." "Judge," Wade replied evenly. But Becca felt his tension in the way his hand found the small of her back, guiding her forward. The church bell tolled, calling the faithful and the curious alike. Inside, their usual pew third from the front. Left side waited empty. The widow Patterson, who normally sat behind them, had moved 3 rows back. The message was clear: the Mexican girl might have Wade's name, but she hadn't earned the town's acceptance. They'd barely settled when the whispers started, rustling through the congregation like wind through wheat. "Barely older than the eldest boy. Heard she used foreign medicine on the little one. Poor Martha must be rolling in her grave." Wade's jaw tightened. Seth stared straight ahead, but his young face had gone pale. May pressed closer to Becca's side while Eli's hands fisted in his lap. Only Lula seemed oblivious, playing with her rag doll's yarn hair. Pastor Morrison climbed to the pulpit, raising his hands for silence. The morning prayer began, voices lifting in familiar rhythm. Becca sang the hymns she'd learned these past weeks, her accent barely noticeable now, though she still sometimes dreamed in Spanish. They were rising for the final blessing when it happened. The church doors slammed open with enough force to rattle the windows. A lone rider stood silhouetted against the morning light dirty leather duster, face hidden beneath a battered hat, spurs ringing against the floorboards like death bells. The congregation froze. "Well, well." The stranger's voice carried the lazy menace of a coiled snake. "Quite the happy family." He strode down the aisle, each step deliberate. Wade moved smoothly, positioning himself between the stranger and his family, hand hovering near where his gun would normally rest. But this was church, he was unarmed. The stranger stopped at their pew, close enough that Becca could smell trail dust and something darker old blood, maybe, or fresh hate. He reached into his duster, and half the congregation flinched. But instead of a weapon, he pulled out a red bandana, worn and stained. "For the boy," he said, and tossed it at Seth's feet. "So he remembers where he comes from." Seth stared at the cloth like it might bite him. His face had gone from pale to gray, and Becca saw his hands tremble before he shoved them in his pockets. "State your business," Wade commanded, his sheriff's voice cutting through the shocked silence. The stranger laughed, ugly and knowing. "My business, just delivering a message. Sheriff, Silas Kincaid sends his regards. Says to tell the boy that blood always tells. The blood of a Kincaid never runs quiet." The name hit the congregation like a physical blow. Silas Kincaid, leader of the Black Mesa Riders, terror of 3 territories. And he was claiming... "Get out," Wade said, each word precise as a bullet. "Now." "I'm going." The stranger backed toward the door, still grinning. "But Silas wanted you to know he's been watching the boy grow, watching him take after his real daddy. That Carver jaw don't change the Kincaid blood in his veins." He was gone before anyone could respond. Hoofbeats thundering away like laughter. The church erupted in whispers, a hive of shocked speculation. All eyes turned to Seth, who stood frozen, the red bandana at his feet like an accusation. "Is it true?" someone called out. "Is the boy Kincaid's—" "Seth is my son," Wade said firmly, loudly, his hand on the boy's shoulder. But Becca saw the truth in the tightness around his eyes, the way Seth couldn't meet anyone's gaze. Pastor Morrison tried to restore order, but the damage was done. Families filed out in clusters, giving the Carvers a wide berth. Only a few brave souls misses. Harrow from the boarding house. Doc Pritchard. The schoolteacher, Miss Douglas, offered nods of support. The walk home was agony. Seth hadn't said a word, hadn't even picked up the bandana, though Eli had grabbed it with the fascination of a boy who just discovered dynamite. May clung to Becca's hand while Lula hummed tunelessly, sensing the distress but not understanding. They'd barely crossed the threshold when Seth exploded. "Is it true?" His voice cracked, swinging between boy and man. Was she?" He couldn't finish, couldn't voice the terrible possibility that his mother had betrayed his father, that he wasn't who he'd thought he was. Wade sank into a chair, suddenly looking every one of his 32 years and more. "Seth, son." "Don't call me that if it's not true." The boy's control shattered. "Everyone heard, everyone knows, they're all saying Ma was that she." Tears he was too proud to shed burned in his eyes. "Your mother was a good woman," Wade said firmly. "The best. She made mistakes before we married. Yes, Silas Kincaid was persuasive, charming, when he wanted to be. She was young, alone after her parents died. He promised marriage, respectability. Instead, he left her with—" He stopped, but the silence said everything. "With me," Seth finished, his voice hollow. "I'm the outlaw's bastard." "You're my son," Wade repeated, steel in his voice now. "I married your mother knowing the truth, loved her for her courage in keeping you, raising you right despite the talk. I put my name on your birth certificate and my love in your raising. Biology doesn't make a father choice, does? And I chose you, Seth William Carver. I choose you every damn day." Eli had gone uncharacteristically quiet, the red bandana twisted in his hands. May was crying silently. But it was Becca who moved first, crossing to Seth with a determination that had seen her through typhoid and border crossings and 1,000 other impossible things. "Look at me," she commanded, and something in her tone made him obey. "You think blood determines who you are. My grandfather was a conquistador who burned villages. My grandmother was Pueblo, saw her family scattered. Their blood runs in me, conqueror, and conquered both. Does that make me either, or do I get to choose who I am by how I live?" Seth's breath hitched. "It's different. Everyone knows now. They'll all look at me and see—" "They'll see what you show them," Becca interrupted. "You want to live down to their expectations, prove their worst fears, or you want to be the young man who protects his sisters, who stands by his father, who chooses honor even when it's hard." "Like you chose us?" The question slipped out, vulnerable and young. "Yes," Becca said simply. "Like I chose you, all of you, not for blood or birth, but because this is my family now, worth fighting for, worth facing down every whisper and suspicious look this town can throw." Seth crumbled then, all his grown-up pretense dissolving as Wade pulled him close. The sheriff held his son while the boy shook with suppressed sobs, murmuring words too low for the others to hear. "Does this mean Seth's a bad guy now?" Lula asked in a small voice. "No, baby," May told her sister firmly. "Seth's the best big brother in the world. Nothing changes that." "Damn right," Eli added, then colored. "I mean, darn right. And if anyone says different, I'll punch him in the nose." "No punching," Wade and Becca said in unison, then looked at each other with surprised recognition. A team. Parents. Despite everything. Later, after Sunday dinner where everyone tried too hard to act normal, Wade found Becca in the garden. She was attacking the winter prep with unusual vigor, as if she could bury the morning's revelations under turned earth. "Thank you," he said, "for what you said to Seth, for how you handled everything." She straightened, brushing dirt from her hands. He needed truth. They all did. The town will talk. It'll be worse now for you. Being associated with my family, Becca cut him off. Sheriff, I crossed the Rio Grande in a drought. I survived smallpox in the camps. I watched my mother die by degrees and still got up each morning. You think I'm afraid of small-minded gossip? Wade studied her, this young woman who'd entered his life from necessity but was becoming something more through sheer force of will. Silas won't let this go. That bandana. The public claim he's playing some game. Then we'll be ready. She met his eyes steadily. All of us. Together. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Together. He agreed. And for the first time, the word didn't sound like a question. As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky the color of that damned bandana, the Carver family gathered in the parlor. Seth read to Lula from her picture book, his voice steady again. The twins worked on their letters, May helping Eli with the harder words. Wade cleaned his rifle, movements methodical and sure. And Becca mended clothes, her needle flashing in the lamplight, stitching them all together one careful seam at a time. Tomorrow would bring fresh challenges, more whispers, more speculation, maybe more threats from the Black Mesa riders. But tonight, in this imperfect circle of lamplight and stubborn love, they were simply family, chosen, defended, and worth every coming storm. The weeks following the church revelation settled into an uneasy rhythm. November bled into December, bringing iron-cold mornings and early darkness. The town's whispers had shifted from shock to persistent speculation. But within the Carver house, something delicate and unnamed was taking root. Becca had established her routines with quiet efficiency. Mornings began before dawn, stoking the stove and preparing breakfast while Wade tended the animals. The children had their chores, Seth hauling water and wood, the twins feeding chickens and gathering eggs, Lula setting the table with careful concentration. They worked together now, not quite seamlessly, but without the sharp edges of those first days. Higher, Becca instructed, guiding Seth's aim with the Winchester. They stood in the field behind the house, empty cans lined up on fence posts. The rifle kicks up and right. Compensate before you squeeze. Seth adjusted, breathed out slowly, and fired. The can spun off its perch. Better. Wade's voice came from behind them. He'd been watching from the barn door, ostensibly mending harness, but drawn by the sound of gunfire. Try the next one, but faster. Trouble doesn't wait for perfect aim. It had become their afternoon ritual when Wade was home teaching Seth and Becca to shoot while the younger children watched from safe distance. Even Eli had been allowed to hold the unloaded rifle, learning its weight and balance. Can I try? May asked, as she did every day. When you're 10, Wade and Becca said in unison, then shared one of those glances that seemed to happen more frequently, surprised recognition of partnership. That evening, as happened more often now, Wade lingered in the kitchen after supper instead of retreating to his office or barn. The children had scattered to their evening occupations, homework, mending, Lula's elaborate games with her doll. Becca worked on a dress she was making for May from fabric bought with careful savings, while Wade cleaned his weapons at the table. Storm coming, he said, nodding toward the window where clouds massed like bruises against the mountains. Could be a bad one. We're prepared. Root cellars full, wood stacked high. Becca bit off a thread, held up the small dress to check the seams. Though I worry about the Hendersons. Their youngest has been poorly, and they're proud. Won't ask for help? Wade considered this. We could take them some supplies. Say it's neighborly sharing before the storm. Becca looked up. Needle paused. Unless you object to being seen making calls with me. There it was, the careful dance they'd been doing around their growing connection. In public, they maintained appropriate distance, playing their roles as sheriff and young wife. But here, in the lamplight with children's voices drifting from upstairs, something else emerged. I don't object, she said softly. The next morning, they loaded the wagon with preserves, flour, and a ham from the smokehouse. The children wanted to come, but Wade deemed the weather too threatening. Seth was left in charge, his chest puffing with responsibility. The ride to the Henderson farm was quiet, broken only by the creak of wheels and the restless wind. Becca pulled her shawl tighter, aware of Wade's solid presence beside her on the bench. They'd shared space for weeks now, but rarely alone. It felt different, charged with possibility and uncertainty. Thank you, Wade said suddenly. For Seth, for all of them, but especially Seth, these past weeks. Since the church, he's standing taller, not carrying shame he doesn't deserve. He's a good boy, just needed reminding that others' sins don't stain him. Martha worried. Wade continued, surprising her with a mention of his late wife, about the truth coming out, about what it would do to him. She'd be grateful, knowing you were here for him. Becca's throat tightened. I'm not trying to replace her. I know. His gloved hand covered hers briefly, warm even through the leather. But you're making your own place. That's good. Important. They were interrupted by their arrival at the Henderson place, where pride indeed battled necessity. But faced with Becca's gentle insistence and Wade's quiet authority, the family accepted the supplies. Mrs. Henderson, worn thin by worry and her child's illness, actually cried when Becca tucked a bottle of fever tonic into the basket. My mother's recipe, Becca explained. It helped Lula. Keep it, just in case. The storm hit on the way home, sudden and vicious. Snow drove horizontal, turning the familiar road into a white mystery. The horses struggled, heads down against the wind. Wade fought to keep them on track while Becca held tight to the wagon seat. There, she pointed through the swirling white. The old Baxter barn. We can shelter there. Wade didn't argue. Turning the team toward the abandoned structure, they barely made it inside before the storm became a solid wall of white fury. The horses stood shivering while Wade and Becca worked together to rub them down with old sacking found in the barn. We'll have to wait it out, Wade said, squinting through the gaps in the walls. Could be hours. They found a relatively clean corner with old hay bales for sitting. Becca had grabbed a blanket from the wagon, and they huddled under it, sharing warmth as the storm raged outside. The forced intimacy should have been awkward. They'd barely touched since their wedding day, but instead felt natural, necessary. The children will worry, Becca said. Seth will handle things. He's responsible. Wade shifted, his arm settling around her shoulders. For warmth. The gesture said, only warmth. Tell me about your family. Before. So she did, surprising herself. Talked about her father's hands, scarred from mine work but gentle when he taught her to read. Her mother's voice, singing old songs while she cooked. The journey north. Hope and heartbreak mixed like dust and tears. They would have liked you, she finished. Mama especially. She believed in choosing your ground and standing firm. And your father. He would have tested you, Becca admitted with a small smile. Made sure you were worthy of his daughter. Am I? The question came out rough. I'm older, set in my ways. I brought you into a ready-made family with troubles you didn't create. And now with Silas making claims. Becca turned to face him, studying his weathered face in the dim light. You're a good man, Wade Carver, a good father. You've been nothing but honorable with me. Even when, she stopped, heat climbing her cheeks. When what? When, maybe, sometime. I wouldn't mind if you were less honorable. Just a little. The barn seemed to hold its breath. Wade's hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing across her cheekbone with surprising tenderness. Becca, just her name, but weighted with everything they hadn't said these past weeks. She leaned into his touch. I know we married for practical reasons, but somewhere between Lula's fever and teaching Seth to shoot and watching you with the children, I started hoping for more. Is that wrong? No. The word came out fierce. God help me. No! He kissed her then, their first real kiss since the perfunctory brush of lips at their wedding. It was careful at first, almost questioning, then deeper as she responded. Her hands found his shoulders, his tangled in her hair. They kissed like people who'd been starving without knowing it, finding sustenance in each other. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the storm had begun to ease. We should talk about this, Wade said, though his arms didn't loosen their hold. About what it means. The children need parents who care for each other, Becca finished. Really care, not just tolerate. They're not the only ones who deserve love. Wade. He pressed his forehead to hers. I don't know how to do this anymore. It's been so long since I wanted. We'll learn together, like everything else, one day at a time. The storm cleared enough to travel as afternoon waned. They made it home to find Seth had indeed managed everything dinner ready. Homework supervised, Lula bathed and in night clothes. The boys' relief at their return was quickly masked by teenage dignity, but Becca caught his grateful smile when Wade ruffled his hair. That night, after the children were abed, Wade didn't retreat to the barn. He stood in the kitchen doorway, hat in hands, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. I was thinking, he began, then stopped, started again. The barn's cold, and with winter coming on harder, the settee in my office converts for sleeping, if you wouldn't mind. That is, if you're comfortable with me staying in the house. Yes, Becca said simply. Stay. Later, as she heard him settling in the next room, Becca touched her lips where the memory of their kiss lingered. Through her window, stars emerged between racing clouds, bright and clear as promises. In the morning, she found Wade had already stoked the stove and made coffee strong and black, the way she'd learned to like it. He handed her a cup without words, but his fingers lingered against hers in the exchange. Such a small thing, but it felt like everything. Storms passed, he said unnecessarily, both of them understanding he meant more than weather. Yes, she agreed, sipping her coffee and tasting possibility. I believe it has. Upstairs, children's feet hit the floor running. Another day was beginning in the Carver house. But something fundamental had shifted. They were no longer just sharing space and duty. They were choosing each other, one careful touch at a time. And outside, though none of them knew it yet, riders watched from the distant hills. Silas Kincaid hadn't forgotten his claimed son or the family that sheltered him. The storm that had passed was only nature's warning. The real tempest was still to come. The morning Wade decided to tell Becca the whole truth dawned cold and clear, ice crystals painting the windows like nature's confession. They sat at the kitchen table after the children left for school, coffee cooling between them. He'd been carrying this weight for weeks now, and her steady presence had finally given him courage to share it. Martha was 16 when she met Silas, he began, voice low and careful. Her parents had just died of fever, left her with nothing but debt. She took work at the boarding house in Millfield, 20 miles south. That's where he found her. Becca listened without interrupting, hands wrapped around her cup. Silas Kincaid wasn't always an outlaw. Back then he was just a charming drifter with smooth words and big promises. Told Martha he'd marry her, give her a home, respectability. She was young, alone, desperate to believe someone cared. Wade's jaw tightened. He left the morning she told him about the baby, took what little money she'd saved and disappeared into the territories. Seth, Becca said softly. She came here looking for work, pregnant and ruined in the eyes of most. I was deputy then, not much older than you are now. Found her crying behind the church, half frozen, talking about walking into the prairie and letting the winter take her. Wade stood abruptly, moving to the window as if the past lived just beyond the glass. I couldn't let that happen. Offered marriage the next day, protection, respectability, a father's name for her child. People talked, but my badge carried weight. We made it work. Did you love her? The question slipped out before Becca could stop it. I learned to, and she learned to love me. Maybe not the wild, passionate love she'd felt for Silas, but something steady, real. We built a life, had 3 more children. Seth never knew. We agreed he never needed to know. His shoulders sagged. Now that choice feels like selfishness. You protected him, Becca said firmly. That's not selfish. That's love. Wade turned back to her, and she saw the fear there, raw and undisguised. Silas has been watching all these years. That letter at the payroll station, the bandana in church. He's planning something, and I'm terrified it involves Seth. Their conversation was interrupted by hoofbeats and wheels, an expensive carriage pulling up to their gate. Through the window, they watched a woman emerge like visiting royalty, silk dress despite the frontier dust. Elaborate hat perched on graying hair, posture that announced breeding and money with every movement. Who is that? Becca asked, already dreading the answer. Wade's face had gone grim. Augusta Whitcomb, Martha's sister. They barely had time to exchange worried glances before the knock came, imperious, demanding. Wade answered while Becca hastily checked her appearance in the hall mirror. The faded calico and flour-dusted apron marked her clearly as what she was, a working frontier wife. No match for silk and San Francisco sophistication. Wade? Augusta swept in without invitation, her sharp eyes cataloging everything, the simple furniture, the mended curtains, Becca herself. Still living like a hermit. I see, and this must be the child bride the whole territory is gossiping about. Mrs. Carver, Wade corrected coldly. My wife, Becca, and you're not welcome here. Augusta. Oh, but I rather think I am. She produced a leather portfolio from her bag. You see, I've been remiss in my duties as the children's aunt. My dear sister's death left me quite distraught. You understand. But I've recovered now, and I've come to do what's right. She laid papers on the table like playing cards in a rigged game. Legal documents, Becca could see. Official seals and flowing script that meant trouble. Petition for custody, Augusta announced. My lawyers assure me the case is quite strong. A widower who works dangerous hours, leaving 4 young children in the care of a teenager who barely speaks English. My English is fine, Becca interrupted, her accent thickening only slightly with anger. Augusta's smile was razor-sweet. Of course, dear. But judges care about more than language. They care about proper upbringing, education, opportunity, things I can provide that a sheriff and his foreign wife cannot. Get out! Wade's voice had dropped to the dangerous quiet that preceded violence. I'm staying at the Grand Hotel. My lawyer will be in touch. Augusta paused at the door, her mask of civility slipping. Those children deserve better than this. Wade, Martha would be horrified to see them raised by some Mexican. The door slammed behind her hard enough to rattle the windows. In the silence that followed, Becca felt the weight of every fear she'd pushed down these past weeks. Not Mexican enough for her mother's people, too Mexican for this town, and now not good enough for the children she'd come to love. She can't take them, Wade said, but uncertainty colored his words. No judge would. Wouldn't they? Becca moved to the window where Augusta's carriage was disappearing. A rich white woman from San Francisco versus the teenage Mexican wife. And when Silas's claim about Seth comes up in court, Wade pulled her against him, fierce and protective. We'll fight, get testimonies from neighbors, from Doc Pritchard about how you saved Lula. Pastor Morrison will speak for us. Will he after what happened in church? But there wasn't time to plan further. The children would be home soon. And this news had to be handled carefully. They agreed to wait, to let Augusta make the first legal move while they prepared their defense. The next days passed in tense normalcy. Becca went about her routines, cooking, cleaning, teaching May her letters. But Augusta's presence in town poisoned everything. The woman held court at the hotel restaurant, telling anyone who'd listen about her poor orphan nieces and nephews and the conditions they lived in. It was May who brought home the worst of it. "Prudence Hartley says her mother says we're going to live in a mansion," she reported at dinner, her small face troubled. "She says Aunt Augusta has a house with servants and we'd each have our own room and toys and—" She trailed off, seeing her father's expression. "Is it true?" Eli demanded. "Is she trying to take us?" Wade set down his fork carefully. "Your Aunt Augusta has ideas about what's best for you, but this is your home. Becca and I won't let anyone take you from it." "I don't want servants," Lula said solemnly. "I want Becca to brush my hair. She's not our real mother anyway." Eli burst out, then immediately looked stricken. "I didn't mean—" "It's all right," Becca said quietly, though the words stung. "You're right. I'm not your real mother, but I'm real in all the ways that count. I'm really here every morning. I really take care of you when you're sick. I really love you, even when you put frogs in the washing tub." Eli Carver. That was one time, he protested weakly. Seth had been silent through dinner, but now he spoke. "If they take us to San Francisco, what happens when Silas comes? Who protects us there?" The question hung heavy. Wade reached for Becca's hand across the table, a public declaration in front of the children. "We're a family, all of us. We stay together." But Augusta wasn't done. She began appearing everywhere at the general store when Becca shopped, at the school when the children emerged, even at church, sitting in the front row like visiting dignity. She brought gifts, a new dress for May that made Becca's homemade one look shabby, books for Seth, toy soldiers for Eli, an expensive doll for Lula. "I don't like her," Lula whispered to Becca one night, clutching her old rag doll. "She smells like medicine and her smile is wrong." The legal papers arrived on a Tuesday. Deputy Hawkins delivered them, looking apologetic. "Sorry, Wade. Judge Holbrook says it's official. Custody hearing set for next month." Becca read through the petition that night, her heart sinking with each allegation. Her age, her nationality, the inappropriate exposure to violence of teaching her to shoot, the questionable judgment of keeping Seth after the revelation of his parentage. Augusta's lawyers had been thorough. "We need help," she told Wade, "a lawyer of our own. I'll wire Denver, find someone who'll take our case." But good lawyers cost money, and a sheriff's salary barely covered necessities. Becca looked at her mother's silver locket, the last valuable thing she owned. Tomorrow she'd take it to Mr. Chen, who sometimes bought such things for discreet clients. Family came first. That night, unable to sleep, she found Seth on the porch, wrapped in a blanket and studying the stars. "Can't sleep either." She sat beside him, pulling her shawl tight. "If we have to go with her," Seth said slowly, "I'll run. Take Lula and disappear. I know these mountains. We could hide until you're caught and she uses it as proof your father can't control you." Becca touched his shoulder gently. "Running makes you look guilty. We stand and fight. Seth, that's what Carvers do." "You're a Carver too now," he said, and for the first time since that awful day in church, he smiled. "Guess that means you have to be as stubborn as the rest of us." "I guess it does." They sat in comfortable silence, watching clouds scud across the moon. Tomorrow would bring new battles, testimonies to gather, prejudices to overcome, a family to defend. But tonight, they were just a stepmother and stepson, sharing the quiet understanding that some bonds are forged in choice rather than blood. Inside, Wade stood at the window watching them, his hand pressed to the glass. He'd failed Martha in many ways, but he wouldn't fail their children, or the remarkable young woman who'd chosen to stand with them. Augusta Whitcomb had wealth and law on her side, But the carvers had something more powerful, the fierce love of the deliberately chosen. The real fight was just beginning. The smell hit them first, acrid smoke carried on the December wind like a harbinger of hell. Becca had been kneading bread when she saw it through the kitchen window, a wall of orange consuming the prairie grass, racing toward Coyote Ridge with terrifying speed. "Fire!" She ran to the porch, ringing the dinner bell with frantic strength. "Prairie fire!" Wade burst from the barn, took one look at the horizon, and began shouting orders. "Seth, get the horses to the creek, Eli. May, help Becca soak every blanket and cloth in the house, Lula. Stay with Becca." The town bells began tolling the universal signal for all hands needed. Within minutes, riders appeared from every direction, faces grim beneath hat brims. Prairie fires were democracy incarnate. They threatened rich and poor, white and Mexican, lawman and outlaw alike. Winds pushing it straight for town. Judge Holbrook wheezed, his usual pompousness replaced by fear. "We need a fire break along the North Ridge." "Already on it," Wade replied, swinging onto his horse. "Becca, take the children to the creek if it gets too close. Don't wait for me." Their eyes met for a heartbeat, a lifetime of words in a glance, then he was gone, leading a dozen men toward the approaching inferno. Becca organized the women and children with the efficiency of someone who'd faced catastrophe before. They soaked blankets, filled every container with water, moved livestock to safer ground. Even Augusta Whitcomb, caught visiting the general store, found herself pressed into service. "This is precisely why these children need civilization," Augusta muttered, her silk dress already ruined by ash and water. In San Francisco, the whole city burned in 06 misses, Harrow snapped. "Less talking, more working, or we'll all be cinders." The fire moved faster than seemed possible, a rolling wave of destruction that turned the afternoon sky black. Men worked frantically to dig fire breaks, but the flames jumped their pathetic barriers like laughing demons. The heat grew unbearable even at distance. "We need to evacuate," Doc Pritchard announced. "Women and children to the creek." But as they prepared to flee, Eli noticed something that made Becca's blood freeze. "Where's Seth?" In the chaos, no one had seen him return from moving the horses. Wade's son, stubborn, responsible Seth, was somewhere out there in the smoke and flames. "Take the children to safety," Becca ordered May, pressing Lula into her sister's arms. "Now!" "Becca, no!" May cried. But Becca was already running, grabbing a soaked blanket as she went. The smoke hit like a physical wall, stealing breath and sight. She pulled the wet blanket over her head and pushed forward, calling Seth's name. The roar of fire drowned everything, a sound like the earth itself screaming. Heat pressed from all sides, and for a moment she thought of her mother's stories about purgatory. Then, through the chaos, she heard a horse's panicked whinny. Following the sound, she found Seth trying to free Wade's stallion, trapped by a fallen beam in the abandoned Baxter barn, the same place she and Wade had sheltered during the storm. "The rope's tangled," Seth shouted, coughing violently. "I can't leave him." Together they worked, Becca using her small knife to cut while Seth pulled. The fire was close now, too close, the old wood of the barn beginning to smoke. Just as the rope parted and the horse bolted free, a figure on horseback materialized through the smoke like something from a nightmare. Silas Kincaid sat easy in the saddle despite the chaos, his face covered by a wet bandana but his eyes unmistakable cold blue, just like Seth's. "Well, well," he drawled. "The boy and his new mama, how touching." "Get back!" Becca pushed Seth behind her, though what protection she could offer against an armed outlaw, she didn't know. "Relax, Senora. I'm not here to hurt the boy. Just wanted to look at him, my blood, raised by another man." Silas studied Seth with proprietorial interest. "You've got your mother's chin but my eyes. My determination too, staying to save a horse while the world burns." "I'm nothing like you." Seth spat, finding courage in his fear. No, we'll see about that. Blood tells, boy. Always does. Silas wheeled his horse, then paused. Tell Carver I'll be seeing him soon. Got business to discuss about what's mine. He vanished into the smoke, leaving them choking on more than ash. Becca grabbed Seth's arm. Move now. They ran, the wet blanket their only shield against falling embers. Behind them, the Baxter barn exploded into flames. Ahead, through the smoke, she glimpsed the creek and Wade riding hard toward them, his face a mask of terror. Becca, Seth. He swept Seth up behind him on the horse, reached for Becca. For a moment she was pressed between them, feeling Seth's arms tight around her waist. Wade solid and real in front of her. Safe. Family. They made it to the creek just as the fire reached the town's edge. But the firebreak held barely. Men beat at spot fires with wet blankets. Women passed water buckets in endless chains. And slowly, agonizingly, they fought the blaze to a standstill. As dusk fell, Coyote Ridge stood singed but surviving. The prairie for miles was black wasteland. But the town itself had lost only a few outbuildings. Exhausted families gathered in the church, sharing water and what food had survived. You saved him, Wade whispered to Becca as Doc Pritchard tended her burned hands. You ran into hell for my son. Our son, she corrected softly. He's ours, Wade. All of them are. Seth, sitting nearby with a blanket around his shoulders, heard. His smoke-reddened eyes filled with tears he was too tired to hide. Silas was there. He said quietly, in the fire. He said blood tells. Wade went very still. What else? That he has business with you, about what's his. The implications hung heavy as smoke. But before Wade could respond, Augusta Whitcomb appeared, her ruined dress and ash-streaked face making her look almost human. This, she announced to anyone listening, is exactly why I'm petitioning for custody. Children forced to fight fires, exposed to outlaws, living in constant danger. Shut up. The words came from Seth, shocking everyone. Just shut up. You weren't here when Ma died. You weren't here for Lula's fever. You show up now with presents and promises. But where were you when we needed family? I'm your family, Augusta insisted. No. May stood, still clutching Lula, her small face fierce. Family stays. Family fights fires together. Family runs into danger for each other. Becca's our family. You're just a lady with money. And judges listen to ladies with money. Augusta snapped, but something in her eyes wavered. Then they'll also listen to this. Mrs. Harrow stepped forward, followed by others, the school teacher, the pastor's wife, even Judge Holbrook. We've all seen what kind of mother Becca Carver is. Age doesn't matter when you've got that kind of courage. The Mexican woman barely speaks. I speak well enough to say this, Becca interrupted, standing despite her exhaustion. Today, your money didn't save this town. Your connections didn't fight the fire. We did, all of us, together. That's what these children are learning here. Not just manners and advantages, but courage and community, and standing together when everything burns. Doc Pritchard cleared his throat. I'll be testifying at that hearing about how Mrs. Carver saved Lula's life with her medical knowledge, and how she ran into an inferno for Seth without hesitation. As will I, added Pastor Morrison, about the faith and dedication I've witnessed. One by one, the townspeople who'd once whispered about the Mexican girl married too young began to speak up. The fire had burned away more than prairie grass. It had cleared the ground for something new to grow. Augusta stood isolated, her certainty cracking. She looked at the 4 children clustered around Becca and Wade, saw the unit they formed. The bond's fire had only strengthened. I need to rest, she said finally. We'll speak tomorrow. But tomorrow brought its own revelations. Eli, exploring the burned ground with boyish fascination. found something that made Wade's face go dark, the distinctive shoe of a horse. The kind only the Black Mesa riders used. The fire hadn't been natural or accidental. It had been set. Multiple points of origin creating the deadly wall that nearly consumed the town. Distraction, Wade said grimly. Or revenge for something. Either way, Silas is escalating. That night, as Becca tucked in the children, all four insisting on sleeping in the same room. Needing closeness after the day's terror, Lula asked in a small voice, "Is the bad man going to take Seth away?" "No, baby," Becca promised, smoothing the child's hair. "We won't let him." "Good, because Seth's ours. The fire said so." Children's logic, but Becca understood. They'd been forged together in those flames. The last barriers burned away. Whatever legal battles waited, whatever threat Silas posed, they would face it as what they'd become, a family. Tested by fire and found true. Outside, the prairie still smoldered under a canopy of stars. And somewhere in the darkness, Wade patrolled with his deputies, protecting what mattered most while Becca held the home front. The fire had been Silas's warning shot. The real battle was coming. But the Carvers would be ready. The makeshift courtroom smelled of sawdust and smoke. The regular courthouse had suffered damage in the fire, so Pastor Morrison had offered the church. Rows of pews now served as gallery seating, packed with townspeople who'd come to witness the custody battle that had divided Coyote Ridge for weeks. Judge Artemis Greeley from Denver sat behind a table that usually held communion wine. A fair man, Wade had said, but strict about the law. Beside him, a court reporter prepared his materials while Augusta's lawyer, a sharp-faced man named Thornton from San Francisco, arranged papers with predatory precision. "Don't fidget," whispered their own lawyer. Jacob Steinberg, a young man from Denver who'd taken their case for half his usual fee plus future considerations. "Let them see a united family." Becca smoothed her best dress, the blue one, carefully mended after the fire, beside her. Wade sat rigid in his sheriff's uniform, the badge polished but unable to hide the burns on his hands from fighting the flames. The children occupied the pew behind them, Seth in his father's old jacket, the twins in their school clothes, Lula clutching her rag doll. Judge Greeley called the proceedings to order. "This is a petition for change of custody regarding the minor children of the late Martha Carver, Mrs. Augusta Whitcomb petitions for full guardianship based on concerns about their current living situation." Thornton rose like a snake uncoiling. "Your Honor, we'll demonstrate that these children are being raised in dangerous, unsuitable conditions by a girl barely of age herself, who cannot provide the education, refinement, or opportunities they deserve." "Pretty words," someone muttered from the gallery. Becca thought it might be Mrs. Harrow. The testimony began with Augusta, resplendent in new mourning clothes that emphasized her respectability. She spoke of her dear sister Martha, the family's good bloodlines, her own resources and connections in San Francisco society. "I can provide private tutors, music lessons, proper social training," she said, dabbing at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. "What can a teenage Mexican girl offer compared to that?" "Love," May said clearly from behind them, earning a sharp look from the judge. Thornton presented his evidence methodically. Becca's age, barely 18. Her foreign birth and limited formal education. The dangerous nature of frontier life, emphasized dramatically with accounts of the recent fire and Seth's encounter with Silas Kincaid. The boy was exposed to a known outlaw. His so-called parents put him in mortal danger. "Objection," Steinberg said mildly. "The child chose to save horses during a natural disaster. That shows character, not negligence." Sustained. "Mr. Thornton, please stick to facts, not interpretation." But the damage accumulated. Photographs of Augusta's San Francisco mansion, letters from prestigious schools willing to accept the children, bank statements showing resources that dwarfed a sheriff's salary. Then came the character witnesses against them. Prudence Hartley's mother testified about the scandal of the marriage, the unseemly haste, the Mexican influence. The owner of the Grand Hotel mentioned seeing Becca purchase cheap cuts of meat, implying poverty. Through it all, Becca kept her chin high, her hand finding Wade's under the table. She felt the children's tension behind her, heard Lula's small whimpers. Finally, Steinberg rose for their defense. "Your Honor, I'd like to call Rebecca Carver to testify." Becca took the witness chair, aware of every eye upon her. Thornton approached like a wolf. "Mrs. Carver, though I understand that title is barely 2 months old, tell us about your background." So she did. Her father's death in the mines, her mother's slow decline, the journey north, seeking work and hope. She spoke simply, without self-pity, in English that carried only traces of her mother's accent. "And what qualifies you to raise 4 children?" "Love," Becca said firmly. "Determination, the knowledge that family isn't about blood or money, but about showing up every day, about fighting fever at midnight and teaching letters by lamplight, about running into fire without thinking because one of them needs you." Pretty speech, but can you provide Latin tutors, piano lessons, connections to good society? "No, but I can teach them to read the weather and tend wounds, to make bread from nothing and find medicine in plants, to stand firm when the world says they're not enough because of their name or skin or circumstances." Her voice grew stronger. "I can teach them that. Because you're Mexican." "Because I'm human. Because I've survived. Because I choose them. Every day. And that choice makes us family." Thornton shifted tactics. "Let's discuss the recent fire. You endangered yourself recklessly. To save Seth. Who wouldn't have been in danger if properly supervised? Every child in town was in danger. It was a prairie fire. Started by associates of Silas Kincaid, who claims to be Seth's father. The church erupted. Judge Greeley banged for order while Becca waited, calm in the storm. When quiet returned, she spoke clearly. "Yes, Silas Kincaid fathered Seth. Wade has never hidden that from me. He married Martha knowing the truth, claimed Seth as his own, raised him with love and honor. That's what real fathers do. They choose to stay." "But the boy is living a lie. The boy is living a truth." The words burst out with such force that Thornton stepped back. "The truth that Wade Carver chose him, fights for him, would die for him. The truth that I chose all 4 of them when I married their father. The truth that family is built on choice, not chance." Steinberg took over, guiding her through gentler questions. She spoke of daily life, Lula's nightmares fading, May's growing confidence, Eli's garden finally sprouting after patient tending, Seth standing taller despite the weight of revelation. Then came their witnesses. Doc Pritchard testified about Lula's fever, how Becca's knowledge saved her life. 30 years I've practiced medicine, and that girl knew remedies I didn't, stayed up 3 straight nights fighting for that child. Mrs. Harrow spoke of Becca's character, her work ethic, her grace under pressure. Pastor Morrison testified about the family's church attendance, their growing bonds, the way even difficult Eli now looked to Becca for guidance. "I've buried too many broken families," the pastor said soberly. "This one is healing. Why would we tear it apart?" The surprise witness was Judge Holbrook, who'd presided over the initial hearing. "I came here prepared to support Mrs. Whitcomb," he admitted, causing a stir. "Proper society, good breeding, all that. Then I watched that girl run into hellfire for a child not even born to her. Made me reconsider what proper means." Throughout it all, Seth had been growing increasingly agitated. Finally, as Thornton began his closing argument about bloodlines and opportunities, the boy stood. "I want to speak." Judge Greeley frowned. "Young man, you're not scheduled." "Please, Your Honor, everyone's talking about what's best for us. Doesn't anyone want to hear what we think?" The judge considered, then nodded. "Approach." Seth walked forward like he was approaching a gallows, but his voice was steady. My name is Seth William Carver. My father is Wade Carver, the man who chose me before I was born. My mother was Martha Carver, who died last year. My new mother is Becca Carver, who ran into fire for me. He turned to face Augusta. You talk about blood and breeding like they matter most. You know what? Maybe I do have outlaw blood. Maybe that's why I can see through pretty lies to hard truths. And the truth is, you don't want us. You want to fix some guilt about not being there for your sister. But we're not broken things to fix. We're a family. Seth, Augusta started. No. His voice cracked, showing his youth. But he pushed on. You offer Latin. Becca teaches us Spanish and English both. Piano lessons. She sings us Mexican lullabies that chase nightmares away. Good society. I'd rather have good people neighbors who fight fires together, who share what little they have, who judge by actions, not accents. He looked directly at Judge Greeley. Silas Kincaid might be my blood father, but he's also the man who abandoned my mother, who burns towns and robs stages. Wade Carver is the man who stayed, who taught me to ride and shoot and read, who shows up every day, even when it's hard. That's my father. And Becca. She's 19 years old and braver than anyone in this room. That's my mother. Don't you dare take us from them. The silence was complete. Then Lula slipped from her pew, toddled forward, and wrapped her arms around Seth's legs. May and Eli followed, the four of them standing together like they had during the fire, a unit unbreakable. Well, Judge Greeley said after a long moment, I believe I've heard enough. Court will recess while I consider. The church doors slammed open. Two of Silas Kincaid's riders stood there, guns drawn but not quite aimed. Behind them, Silas himself sauntered in like he owned the place. Sorry to interrupt, he drawled, but I heard there was some question about my boy's custody. Thought I should weigh in. Chaos erupted. Women screamed. Men reached for weapons most didn't carry in church. Wade was already moving, pushing Becca and the children behind him. Nobody move, Silas commanded, his men's guns emphasizing the point. I'm just here to talk. See, you're all debating who should raise my son, but nobody asked me. You have no rights here, Judge Greeley said with surprising firmness. You're a wanted man interrupting legal proceedings. Legal, Silas laughed. Rich woman trying to buy children, that's legal, but their real father wanting a say isn't. He focused on Seth. Boy, you're old enough to know the truth. Your mother and I were nothing. Seth interrupted. You were a lie she believed. Wade Carver is my father in every way that counts. Silas's face darkened. Blood tells, boy, you can't escape what you are. You're right, Seth said quietly. I can't escape having your blood, but I can choose what to do with it. And I choose to be nothing like you. The standoff stretched taut. Then Becca did something unexpected. She began to sing soft and clear, a Mexican lullaby she'd sung to Lula during the fever. One by one, the children's voices joined hers. Then Wade's rough baritone, then others' misses, Harrow, Doc Pritchard, even Judge Holbrook. It was absurd, singing lullabies while outlaws held guns, but it was also profound, a community choosing harmony over chaos, love over fear. Silas's men shifted uncertainly. This wasn't how robberies were supposed to go. Enough, Silas snarled, but his command lacked force. Outside, whistles sounded the town's alarm. Someone had slipped out and alerted others. Soon the church would be surrounded. You need to go, Wade told him quietly. Now, while you can. Silas looked around at the unified townspeople, at his son standing firm with his chosen family, at the woman barely out of girlhood who faced him without flinching. This isn't over, he promised, backing toward the door. Yes, it is, Seth said. I'm not yours. I never was. I never will be. The outlaws vanished into the afternoon light. In the aftermath, as people slowly settled, Judge Greeley cleared his throat. Well, that was illuminating. He looked at Augusta, who sat pale and shaken. Mrs. Whitcomb, do you still wish to pursue custody, knowing it would mean taking these children from the only stability they know, exposing them to continued pursuit by violent men? Augusta's carefully constructed composure finally cracked. She looked at her sister's children, brave Seth, protective May, fierce Eli, tiny Lula, and saw Martha in them. But she also saw what she hadn't expected: they were already home. I withdraw my petition, she said quietly. Then, stronger, but I reserve the right to visit, to know them, to be Aunt Augusta, if they'll have me. May was the first to nod. Trust would take time. But the door was open. Judge Greeley smiled for the first time. Then it's my judgment that the children remain with Sheriff and Mrs. Carver, their legal and proper guardians. Court dismissed. The celebration was subdued. Too much had happened too fast. But as the family walked home together, Becca felt the shift. They'd been tested by law and lawlessness both, and survived. You sang, Wade murmured, his arm around her shoulders. In the middle of all that, you sang. Sometimes, Becca replied. When words fail, music speaks. My mother taught me that. Our mother, May corrected, taking her hand. Yeah, Eli added gruffly. Our mother. As they reached their gate, Seth looked back at the church where so much had transpired. He'll be back. Silas, he won't give up easy. Then we'll be ready, Wade said firmly. All of us. Together, Lula added sleepily from Wade's arms. Together, the word followed them into their home like a blessing, settling into the walls that had seen so much change in so few months. Whatever came next, outlaws or ordinary days, they would face it as what the fire and the trial had proven them to be: a family, chosen and choosing, every single day. The spring rain arrived like forgiveness, washing away the last black scars from the prairie fire. 3 months had passed since the custody hearing, since Silas Kincaid's dramatic interruption, and Coyote Ridge had settled into watchful peace. But peace in the territories was always temporary, and everyone knew the storm would break eventually. It came on a Tuesday morning, with Deputy Hawkins once again bearing bad news. Wade, they hit the railroad camp, killed 2 guards, made off with the payroll and enough dynamite to blow up half the territory. Wade set down his coffee cup carefully, aware of Becca's eyes on him from across the kitchen. How many riders? 8, maybe 10. They're getting bolder. And Wade. Hawkins glanced at Seth, who'd stopped eating breakfast. Witnesses say Silas was asking about the boy again. Said it was time to collect what was his. Over my dead body, Wade said quietly. That might be what he's planning. The town mobilized quickly. The railroad company had posted rewards, attracting bounty hunters and Pinkerton agents like flies to honey. Wade organized citizen patrols while Becca reinforced their home defenses, teaching even little Lula how to load ammunition. But the real assault came from an unexpected direction. Augusta Whitcomb arrived on the morning stage, not with lawyers this time, but with books, fabric, and a letter that would change everything. She found Becca in the garden, coaxing vegetables from soil that had been ash months before. I've been corresponding with colleagues in San Francisco, Augusta began without preamble, about educational opportunities. There's a new program starting bilingual education, Spanish and English both. They need teachers who understand both cultures. Becca straightened slowly, dirt on her hands, hope and suspicion warring in her chest. Why are you telling me this? Because you're wasted here, girl. Oh, not as a mother you've proven yourself there, but that mind of yours, the way you handled the trial, how you've managed those children. You could be teaching dozens, hundreds. My place is with my family. Of course, that's why I've arranged for the program to expand here, if you're willing. Augusta's smile was rueful. Consider it penance for my prejudices. Martha would have loved seeing you use your gifts fully. Before Becca could respond, The church bell began tolling, not the steady rhythm of Sunday service, but the frantic clanging of alarm. Gunshots cracked in the distance. "Get inside," Becca ordered Augusta, already moving. "Children house, now." The attack was coordinated, professional, while half the Black Mesa riders created chaos on Main Street. Silas and 3 others headed for the Carver home. They'd planned this, studied routines, waited for the moment when Wade would be drawn away. But they hadn't counted on Becca's preparations. "Seth, upstairs window with the rifle," she commanded, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "May, Eli, barricade the back door. Lula, Augusta, the cellar." "I'm staying," Augusta declared, surprising everyone by producing a small derringer from her bag. "I ran once when Martha needed me. Not again." They made their stand as gunfire erupted in town. Seth proved his hours of practice, his shots keeping riders at distance. May reloaded for him with trembling efficiency while Eli watched the back approaches. Becca took position at the front window with Wade's spare Winchester. "Rebecca Carver," Silas's voice carried across the yard. "Send out my boy, and nobody gets hurt." "He's not yours," Seth shouted back, fury overcoming fear. "Blood says different, son." "Blood says nothing." It was Becca who answered, her shot splintering wood inches from Silas's head. "But if you want to discuss blood, come closer. I'll show you what a mother's blood will do to protect her children." The firefight intensified. Windows shattered, walls splintered. Augusta proved surprisingly fierce, her small gun barking defiance, but they were outnumbered, running low on ammunition, and Silas's men were closing in. Then came salvation in the form of pounding hooves not just Wade and the deputies, but half the town. The citizens who'd once whispered about the Mexican girl now rode to defend her, led by Judge Holbrook himself. "For Coyote Ridge," the judge roared, looking decidedly unmerciful. The battle was brief but vicious. Trapped between the house's defenders and the arriving reinforcements, Silas's men fell or fled, but Silas himself, wounded and desperate, made one last play. As Wade dismounted, the outlaw grabbed Lula. She'd crept from the cellar despite orders, drawn by the noise. "Stay back," Silas pressed his gun to the child's head, using her small body as a shield. "I'm leaving, and I'm taking what's mine. The boy for the girl." Time crystallized. Wade and Becca flanked Silas, guns trained but unable to fire. Seth stood in the doorway, his young face tormented. The town held its breath. "You want me?" Seth stepped forward. "Fine. Let her go first." "Seth, no!" Becca cried. "It's okay, Ma." The title came naturally now, especially in crisis. "Lula doesn't deserve this. I'll go." "Smart boy." Silas began backing toward his horse, still holding Lula. "Blood always." He never finished. Seth had continued forward, but not in surrender. As he'd moved, he'd shifted angle, giving Wade and Becca clear shots. More importantly, he'd given Lula the opening she needed. The 6-year-old, trained by her brothers in survival games, went completely limp. Silas stumbled, his grip loosening for just an instant. 3 guns spoke as one Wade's, Becca's, and Seth's, the boy having drawn the small pistol Becca had hidden in his coat that morning. Silas Kincaid fell, his reign of terror ending in the dust of the yard he'd tried to destroy. Lula scrambled away, running not to Wade but straight into Becca's arms. "I played dead like Eli taught me," she announced proudly. "Did I do good?" "You did perfect, mi amor," Becca whispered, holding her tight. The aftermath was a blur of statements and celebrations. The railroad company's reward would pay off the mortgage and establish the educational program Augusta had proposed. Several of Silas's gang were captured, the rest scattered to the winds, and on the spot where Silas fell, Seth did something unexpected. He buried the red bandana that had started so much trouble. "It's over," he said simply. "All of it." That evening, as Doc Pritchard tended minor wounds and neighbors helped repair damage. Wade found Becca on the porch. The spring air was soft, full of promise and the sound of their children laughing even after everything. They could still laugh. "You called him son," Wade said quietly. "During the fight, you called Seth your son." "He is." Becca leaned into Wade's embrace. "They all are. Blood or choice, birth or adoption of the heart, they're ours." Wade was quiet for a long moment. "I've been sleeping in my office for months now." "I know." "Maybe it's time that changed, if you're willing, if you're ready for this to be real in all ways." Becca turned in his arms, studying the face she'd come to love, weathered, scarred, but infinitely dear. "Wade Carver, are you finally courting your own wife?" "I'm trying to." He kissed her then, sweet and sure, tasting of coffee and promises. I know we did this backwards marriage, then friendship, then love, but nothing. We wrote our own story. Why stop now?" From inside came Augusta's voice, trying to teach Eli proper table manners while he argued that frontier life required different rules. May was helping with dinner, and Seth was reading to Lula. Their family, complex and chosen, perfect in its imperfection. A week later, they held a second wedding. Not because they needed to, their first vows had been legal and binding, but because now they meant them with their whole hearts. The church was packed, the same space that had seen so much drama now filled with joy. Seth stood as Wade's best man, proud and tall. May and Lula scattered flower petals with enthusiastic abandon. Even Eli, scrubbed and formal in his new suit, managed to behave. Augusta played the organ, her gift to the sister she'd failed but whose children she'd learned to love. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Morrison began, his eyes twinkling, "we are gathered here to witness something already accomplished but newly understood. These two have walked through fire, literal and figurative, and emerged not just intact, but united." When Wade kissed his bride this time, the whole town erupted in cheers. No hesitation, no duty, just love acknowledged and celebrated as they turned to face their community. Becca in her mother's dress remade with Augusta's silk, and Wade in his best suit with a sheriff's badge polished bright. The pastor made one more pronouncement. "I present to you again, Mr. and Mrs. Wade Carver, and their family, bound not by blood alone but by choice, courage, and unconditional love." The spring rains had brought more than water to the burned prairie. Green shoots pushed through black earth. Wildflowers bloomed where ash had lain. The railroad came through, bringing change and challenge. But Coyote Ridge adapted. The new school opened with Becca teaching both languages, both cultures, preparing children for a world growing larger and more complex. Augusta visited regularly, slowly earning her place as Aunt Gussie, teaching the children about their mother's family while learning to appreciate their father's world. She even started wearing simpler dresses, though she drew the line at completely abandoning silk. On quiet evenings, the Carver family would gather on the porch. Wade might clean his guns while Becca mended clothes. Seth would whittle a skill Wade was teaching him while the twins played checkers. Lula would sing the Mexican lullabies Becca had taught her, her voice carrying across the prairie like hope itself. "Remember when you first came?" Eli asked one such evening. "I put salt in the sugar bowl." "And stepped on my dress," Becca added with mock severity. "I was awful," Eli admitted cheerfully. "But you stayed anyway." "Where else would I go?" Becca reached out to ruffle his hair. "This is home. Your home. All of you." Wade caught her hand, weaving their fingers together. On her finger, beside the simple wedding band, sat a new ring not expensive, but crafted by the local blacksmith from silver and turquoise. Inside was engraved, "Chosen Daily." Because that's what love was. They'd learned. Not just a feeling or a promise, but a choice renewed each morning. Through sickness and health, fire and flood, outlaws and in-laws, they chose each other. They chose family. And in a frontier town where the prairie met the mountains, where cultures mixed and evolved, where the old ways met the new world coming fast on railroad tracks, that choice made all the difference. The Carver family, sheriff and teacher, 4 children born of different circumstances but united in love. Extended family learning to bridge divides, face the future together. Ready for whatever came next, knowing that the strongest bonds aren't always those of blood, but those forged in the daily decision to stay, to fight, to love. As Becca often said when asked about their unusual family, love isn't measured in matching blood or perfect circumstances. It's measured in showing up, staying put, and choosing each other when walking away would be easier. We're family because we choose to be, every single day. And they did. Thank you so much for listening to this tale of love, courage, and family in the Wild West. I hope the story of Becca, Wade, and their children touched your heart as much as it touched mine while sharing it. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please leave a comment below, and let's connect across the miles, just like families connect across differences. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Wild West Night for more tales of the frontier. Hit that like button, and don't forget to press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners who might need to hear that family is truly about choice, not chance. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward your own sunset.